What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking a little about why it's important to change your car's fluids, and that includes all your fluids, from your brake fluid to your gear oil or your differential or axle fluid. Um, Me as a technician, I see this every day. And if you're a technician or even if you're a lube tech, you're going to see it every day. You're going to see dirty fluids, you're going to see nasty fluids, older fluids just burn up, just nasty stuff. And you'll see the good stuff too. But a couple things I want to mention. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube here lately of people talking about you don't need to change your fluids in your car. Oh, it lasts forever, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Especially if you own a older vehicle, whether it be 5, 10 years older, especially. Um, some of your newer cars, and I'll talk about this here in a little bit. On your power steering, a lot of vehicles are going completely away from servicing your power steering system. Um, but first off, let's go ahead and talk about your brake fluid. Brake fluid itself is hygroscopic, and that not hydroscopic, that's hygroscopic. What hygroscopic means is essentially it is a type of fluid or something that attracts moisture from the environment or the air. If you don't believe me, Google it, dictionary, whatever you feel. Hygroscopic, that's what brake fluid is. It doesn't matter if you have a tight seal on your master cylinder or brake fluid reservoir, um, or you don't have a leak. Moisture from the air can still enter through your brake lines, because if you're in a humid environment or moist environment, then you can essentially get moisture and water entering into your brake system, and your brake system is heating up, cooling down, flowing through your valves and pipes, so it heats up and cools down a lot. Um, that's one of your main things that needs to be changed, and I'll go down the list and show you how often you should really service these. Brake fluid, you should really do it between 25 and 30,000 miles, and that is the standard recommended fluid exchange on that. The and that's most manufacturers. It doesn't matter what manufacturer it is, GM, Ford, Asian, domestic, doesn't matter. These are just general mileage ranges. Maybe not exact, but general idea. Like I said, 25 to 30K on, and that's 30,000 miles on the brake flush. Now, am I sitting here trying to sell you flushes? No. Am I a technician? Yes, but do I really care if you come in and buy the flush? Whatever. But we tell you that as a technician and mechanics because it does need to be exchanged. Now, there are some dirty mechanics out there that just tell you don't need it, but just give you a general idea. Brake fluid itself can become dirty, and if you check your fluids and you know what you're looking at, even if you don't know what you're looking at, if you just pop the cap off and it starts looking dark in color, if you take a flashlight in there, you don't have to have expensive test tools to test the brake fluid and all this, or any of these types of fluids. Just a general sign, if it starts looking dark, black, you need to have it exchanged. And I'm not talking about bleeding your brakes system. I'm talking about flushing it. And that's pumping all that old fluid through the lines and the valves and getting new fluid ran through the valves in the system in your master cylinder, cleaning all of that out, and you're putting new fluid in that system. And your transmission fluid, we'll talk about that. Transmission fluid, that is basic properties of transmission fluid. Most people will tell you it's hydraulic fluid. Essentially, kind of yes. And do I recommend as a technician doing transmission flushes? I don't persistently like them, just because any type of transmission, it doesn't matter. For an automatic transmission, that is, exchanging the fluid, I don't persistently try to sell a customer a flush, because you get metallics and metal in there from the clutches and discs and everything else that goes into modern transmissions starts to break down and wear over time. And you'll start getting metallics in there. It may not be necessarily shavings at 30 to 35,000 miles is your general range for a transmission service. Usually, if a customer comes into my shop, I try to recommend doing a pan drop and a service, a filter exchange, and a new gasket set. Because you're getting fresh filter in there, any type of metallics that may be blocking that filter or in that bottom end of the system, at least, you're getting new fluid in there, and you're not pumping all that crap out of there. Now, generally, there are some people who probably generally disagree with me on this, and it's a huge debate: flush versus pan drop and filter exchange. Really, once you start getting into your higher mileage, anybody will tell you if you've never had a transmission service done, they don't recommend it. And as myself as a technician, I won't recommend it if you've never had your service done, just because of the condition of the fluids and everything else. So if you service your transmission regularly, it's good to keep it serviced. Differential, you need to have that done between 20 and 25,000 miles. Just again, general idea. And a lot of people, if you have a differential fluid, then it needs to be exchanged, every so often. And it's one of the most forgot about things on vehicles, because a lot of people don't really care. They're thinking about, okay, brakes and tires and everything else, all these other fluids. And a lot of people forget about the differential or the axle or whatever you call it in your case. And it doesn't matter. Same thing with transmission. You're going to get metallics in there because of the gears and the clutches wearing down, and the bearings and everything else. It needs to be exchanged. It gets nasty and dirty. Same thing when it comes to your transfer case. Transfer case is very similar to transmission. Your planetary gears and things like that, and clutches as well in there. Most of your modern transfer cases are electronic instead of a manual. Now, you still may have a manual transfer case, but if you have a four-wheel drive, then that needs to be serviced as well around the same time your transmission gets done. Now, most of them, I haven't ran into a case of a filter, but usually a transfer case service calls for draining the fluid, pumping new fresh fluid through it, letting it come out, putting new fluid in it, just sitting there running fresh fluid and flushing all that old crap and gunk out, and plugging it back up and putting it together. Coolant. This is another thing that I will say people let go over mileage, because coolant is most coolant, and even if you buy aftermarket coolant from the parts store, O'Reilly's, Vance, AutoZone, wherever you get your parts from, or if you go to the dealership or a shop, most coolant on the market is 5-year, 100,000 miles. And then I have seen this before, 3-year, 75K, 75,000. In some other vehicles, in modern vehicles. But your basis across the board is usually 5-year, 100 or 150,000 miles. And why do you want to exchange that system as well as your other systems? Is because you get sediments that build up in your cooling system. Not only sediments, but the coolant breaks down over time. It's heating and cooling constantly from being on the road. You let your vehicle sit. It needs to be exchanged, and you get a lot of rust in a lot of different parts of your cooling system. There's not just your radiator that your fluid goes into. Those coolant passages run between your radiator is a coolant passage. You've got your water pump. You've got coolant passages for your engine block, your heater core. You've also got, maybe you might have a transmission cooler or some other type of external coolant system besides a radiator that coolant may flow through. And that needs to be exchanged regularly. And again, like I said, 5-year, 100,000 mile on that system, because due to you may also get some type of metallics in there, some way or another. It happens. You're going to get, maybe over time, you're going to lose coolant. Because maybe your vehicle gets too hot, especially in the summertime. We see this a lot as technicians. You might burn a little extra coolant. and nowadays your coolant and antifreeze is all together. It used to be coolant and antifreeze were separate. Coolant properties is usually ethylene glycol, which I'm not going to get into the properties of all these and the chemical breakdowns, but most nowadays is ethylene glycol is your coolant base. And it does not, coolant's not going to dry like water. So if coolant is on your floor or something like that, it's not going to dry out like water will. It doesn't have the drying properties, and it has a higher boiling point than normal water does. So therefore the properties of coolant is used in your modern vehicles. The next fluid we're talking about is power steering. And I have a little sample here. Power steering, it should be serviced regularly. These are two little samples I took from the shop at work. Used power steering fluid and brand new power steering fluid. Now this is yellow power steering fluid or clear, whatever you want to call it. Now there's several different types on the market. For your fluids, you have your yellow or clear, whatever you want to call it. Then you've got your red, which is power steering fluid, which is very similar to transmission fluid. I mean, it's identical, if not, almost the same. And then you have electric power steering fluid. In that case, if you have electronic power steering pump, you'll use electronic power steering fluid for the gear sets and help running your rack and pinion. Again, like I said, this is one reason why I say that you need to exchange your fluids. This is brand new fluid. This is power steering fluid. I took from work a sample. And this is used power steering fluid. Now, this is slightly used, a little bit of burnt to it, but probably still had some life on it. Now, was this something that I did on a customer's car? No. This was some stuff that we had sitting around the shop that I took from a sample of. This stuff here, you can see it's a lot more thicker than the new stuff. It's more watery than this stuff. No, this is not a piss bottle for all you trolls and people who want to comment about it. These are fresh, brand new. Well, this one's not brand new, but this is fresh, brand new power steering fluid. So we will. This is one of the main reasons why we say exchange your fluids. Now, if you want to do your services yourself and you don't want to have a shop or a dealership do it, you can get some type of turkey baster or whatever and suck the old fluid out one little bit at a time and put new fluid in, such as your power steering fluid. There are certain ways and other tools on the market to do that yourself. But you need to make sure you're using the proper fluid and make sure you're using the proper fluid level. And if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that you're checked regularly. As far as that part goes, if you're going to do it yourself, you need to make sure you're doing it right. There's plenty of information out there on the internet or to the dealership or a shop, or sometimes it's even in your owner's manual. But again, these fluids that I've explained need to be exchanged regularly. And this is for modern gas engine vehicles. Now, diesel engines are the same. Diesel vehicles, if you got a diesel truck, if you're using power steering fluid and you're using those fluids, they need to be exchanged regularly, because it's the same thing for the differential, the transmissions, transfer cases, coolants. They need to be exchanged, especially on diesels with their cooling systems, because obviously they're using turbos, they're using intercooler systems, they're using so much more stuff than a normal gas engine would. Now, are they simplistic in a way? Yes, but they can also be more complicated than a normal gas engine. Again, like I say, this is very important, and a lot of people forget about it, of all these fluids. A lot of these fluids need to be exchanged and need to be serviced. So make sure you're doing it right and doing it properly. I appreciate you guys watching and keeping up with the videos. Like, subscribe, share, do what you do. Thanks, guys, for watching. Keep on wrenching, guys.